Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into the waiver wire. So these are guys that we're looking forward to week 7 already. You want to get these guys on your team. You got IR guys, that you've been able to kind of slot down that have been marked out with the most recent updates to the injury reports. And now you got some roster space. You're looking for who to add. We got you in this video. So the first guy we're going to be talking about here, SuperFlex perspective from the quarterbacks, obviously, right? And our first guy is Drake Maye. If he's still out there in your league, this is somebody that you want to take a shot on just in case he ends up to turn out to be pretty good, right? We've seen these rookie quarterbacks that were drafted 1 and 2 start to have quite a bit of success, especially Jake Daniels. Not to say that Maye is on their level or that the Patriots are anywhere close to as ready to compete with weapons and offensive line as those other two teams, but this is somebody that could, kind of creep his way into the top 25, 20 range, right? And that can be very impactful in your Superflex leagues as a bye week replacement, as a possible starter moving forward.
Yeah, so he's definitely getting thrown into the fire. The Patriots have the worst pass blocking offensive line. It's a bottom 5 wide receiver group in terms of getting open. But from a fantasy perspective, like you mentioned, one of the things that's kind of underrated about Drake Maye's game is his ability as a rusher. His last 2 seasons at North Carolina, he combined for over 1,100 rush yards. So maybe he can set a little bit of a floor there. And again, he was the number 3 pick in this year's draft class. So even though the situation isn't good, even though it's probably too early, it's not like he's a lost puppy out there. So let's, have a little optimism. And if he does turn out well and he's already on your team, they get the Jaguars in week 7. So that could be a sneaky spot if you've got, one of your quarterbacks on bye.
Yeah, and the rushing, I think, even if he doesn't rush for a ton of yards, I think it just kind of highlights his mobility. Maybe he has a level of escapability that Brissett didn't have. Maybe he can get off-schedule plays to work. Maybe Pop Douglas, maybe Jalen Polk gets a little bit going here, foreshadowing. So we do kind of like this offense here overall, and I do think Maye, as waiver wire guys, right, as like beat the waiver wire. Now that we've got a new quarterback here, let's check in. Let's get these guys on our roster just in case something happens this week. The second quarterback we're going to talk about here is another one that's taking over as the starter is Spencer Rattler. So this is a little bit more of a short-term play. Obviously Derek Carr's not going to miss forever the rest of the season, anything like that, but he does have an oblique injury. He could miss, 3-4 weeks here, possibly. And in the meantime, right, Rattler was at one time a very highly touted prospect. He looked very good in camp. He got just all kinds of positive news out of camp. And so I do think that there could be something here with Rattler going up against Tampa Bay this week. He gets Denver in week 7, so I don't know if you're going to be starting him in week 7, but, just in case he looks good, there are very, very good weapons here. With New Orleans, they have 2 really good receivers, and obviously Kamara out of the backfield is excellent. So, he could be set up here to succeed if he's able to kind of hit the ground running this week against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of Drake Maye, right? Like New Orleans has this new offensive system that, maybe hasn't looked as great the last couple weeks, but in the beginning of the season, they really seemed like they were rolling. And it's not like Derek Carr is this like high level elite quarterback. So maybe he can kind of figure it out. And like you mentioned with, looking back at Rattler's past, he was the number 1 or consensus number 1 recruit coming out of high school in 2019. Obviously, he went to Oklahoma. He got famously benched in the Red River rivalry game, which was kind of the birth of the legend of Caleb Williams, leading him back down from like 3 scores. But, when he got to South Carolina, he played pretty well. He struggled with turnovers, but then in his 5th year, he was really good. He and Xavier Legette really elevated each other's games. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not the fastest. He doesn't have the biggest arm, but he can throw a very clean ball. So I think in this case, looking at the wide receivers, I would be more optimistic about Chris Olave moving forward than Rashid Shaheed. I think, the days of the Derek Carr deep balls every single game might kind of be past Shaheed, but I think in this system with these weapons, it'll be interesting. And again, in Superflex, it's like, how often does a quarterback become available? So kind of looking at it from that perspective, I think it's worth a speculative add.
Dude, you just cannot give up on the fact that Shaheed has been out targeting Olave by a lot.
I can't, dude. It's horrible.
Yeah, talking about how you're more optimistic about Olave. So I will say Rattler came out in his press conference and he was asked specifically about Olave. And he said, he's out there. He's amazing. He's always open. I'm just going to throw him the ball. So that at least inspires some confidence.
He loves to lock on to his number one target, right? Like he'll make some errant bad throws and he'll turn it over, but he will have eyes for his number one. And I think that's probably going to be happening with Olave, but we definitely expect a few turnovers, especially against Denver.
Yeah.
God.
Well, I mean, it's if he's going to lock on to the number one, I'm not so sure that isn't Shaheed right now. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I will say that Shaheed has completely and totally dominated the target. So, in this offense, though, like you said, if he's not going to just be pushing the ball down the field, we know Carr likes to throw it deep. So it could be a situation where in the interim here, it's going to be difficult for Shaheed to get going, and Olave maybe gets a little bit more target share. So I wish Olave was just more consistent throughout the game. Like, just give him a target or two every drive, right? Like as you're getting going, just make sure he's involved and engaged. I mean, 3 targets last week was unacceptable, no matter.
And they have so many drives with him where it's like he'll have 3 targets in the first drive. They'll move the ball down the field. He looks great, and then he'll just disappear for 2 quarters. And it's like,
and he's like that happened earlier in like week 2 or whatever. It was like 3 for 36 on the first drive, and it's like, okay, here we go. Here comes Olave, and then it was like you look at the box score in the third quarter, or as you're going into the witching hour, and it's like 3 for 36. And I was like, what is going on here? You just forgot about it. So I think with Rattler, like you said, higher hopes for Olave to get a bigger target share here. And if Rattler is going to lock onto him, that could be good for him over Carr. Going down to the running back position and sticking in this same offense, actually, we want to talk about Kendre Miller, running back for the New Orleans Saints. So this is his second year. He started the year on IR with a hamstring injury. He was hurt all year last year, too. He was not able to stay healthy at all. He was very good in college. So, right, that's pretty much all we have to go on. Dennis Allen has highlighted that to nauseum, that's all he has to go on. He does not feel like he knows what he has in Kendre Miller because he's been constantly hurt. So we like to talk about that because in the press conference, like, I see it as frustration, but maybe you could give a different perspective on what Dennis Allen is thinking with Kendre Miller.
Well, I just don't think that Dennis Allen likes him because every time Kendre Miller is brought up in press conferences, Dennis Allen just has this like, he's never available. I don't know. He's not, and maybe that's a frustration of him being hurt. Maybe he hasn't been as good in the practices that he is playing. I don't really know. It's kind of a weird vibe, but I also am kind of a conspiracy theorist in the sense that I think Derek Carr hates Chris Olave too, so maybe I'm a little bit tough on these Saints players. But I think it's important what you mentioned about him being good in college, because to me, I don't really have a lot of faith in those guys that came from the TCU team that went to the national championship, right? Like, their offense was so good in the Big 12, and they were spreading it all over. And look who was the first round pick. It was Quentin Johnston. Flopped his first year. Chargers selected another 4th round pick from TCU, Darius Davis. There was also selected Max Duggan. Kendre Miller was a 3rd round pick from that team. So it's like maybe it was just the system and the lack of competition. So I definitely want to see it first on an NFL field, but we haven't really seen him on the field. So hopefully he can get going. But I think what we've talked about with Kamara before is like they need to kind of limit his touches because he will break down. So hopefully he can be a nice complementary piece to this offense.
Yeah, like Kamara's not going to continue to just get 25 carries. Okay? That's not his game. That should never be the game plan. Like I think Dennis Allen expressed all that frustration because they were hoping Kendre Miller coming into the year was going to be that complement, that guy that gets 10 carries a game, the guy that can be explosive. I mean, he is 6 foot 220. He is only 22 years old. Like I think it was a lot of frustration. Like, look, we thought we were going to have a 1-2 punch. We thought Kamara was going to be able to play a lot between the 20s, be very involved in the passing game. We're going to have Kendre Miller kind of the hammer on the goal line and, be able to take a drive or two off of Kamara here and there. So, and then just to note, he is currently on IR. So if you go and look him up, he's on IR, but he did practice in full completely leading up to week 5, and he's practiced in full this entire week too. So I do expect him to be activated off of IR for Sunday's game. Going down to the wide receivers now, we're going to talk about a pair of teammates. So there's going to be 4 guys here, but it's going to be Indianapolis is where we're going to start first. So we're going to talk about Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. So Alec Pierce first, there's a chance he's already owned in your leagues, right? Like, he's been good for as limited opportunities is I feel like his snap share has been pretty good. He hasn't gotten a ton of targets, but he's been awesome with those targets. He caught a bomb in week 1. He caught a bomb in week 2. He caught 3 bombs last week. So, it's just like he's kind of just been making it work on limited target share. But with Michael Pittman being out now, I do think that there's an opportunity for one of these guys to step up into more volume, and also both of them to be on the field a lot more. Adonai Mitchell has barely been on the field. I know he got 7 targets last week, but he was only on the field for 27% of the snaps. So I do think Alec Pierce kind of evolves into 100% around that, right? 90% snap share. Adonai Mitchell will probably go up into the 60-70 range. So order of priority here, I would look for Alec Pierce first, and then I would look for Adonai Mitchell. If you're in your dynasty leagues, look for Adonai Mitchell first, because this could be kind of the springboard he needed to get onto the field to kind of show what he's going to do. He's going to get 4 games here, likely 3-4 games to show what he can do. And so, Alec Pierce is somebody that I think this week against Tennessee, you can probably start if it is Joe Flacco. They did announce that Anthony Richardson's going to be a game time decision, so we don't have that info yet. But I do think if it is Flacco, that Pierce kind of enters that top 25 wide receiver conversation.
Yeah, and Pierce is, funny enough, wide receiver 17 on the season. He's kind of this year's Gabe Davis, like just boom bust, which is but I think, I do agree that with Flacco, Pierce will be a little bit higher. But I think even with Richardson, like in his love of throwing the deep ball, I think that plays really well into Alec Pierce's game. And like you said, with Adonai Mitchell, like if you're looking for, young, talented players that could potentially be ascending and you want to keep them on your roster for the long term, I think that's maybe your guy, but I don't really expect him to necessarily take that huge leap. I know a lot of his, like, talent wise, he's, incredible, right? But some of his issues coming out of college has been with effort and things like that. But you're right. Now he's a chance to step up. So
yeah. And Mitchell didn't do a ton when Downs was out, because Downs was out week 1 and week 2, and he got on the field for 64 and 59% of the snaps, right? So, and he didn't do much with that work, but maybe, this is 4 weeks later now at this point. So maybe he's, got more acclimated in practice and is more ready. We saw him get 7 targets last week on limited snap share. So like when he was on the field, he was basically getting targeted. So, maybe there's something there that we didn't see earlier in the year with Adonai Mitchell. So and again, another guy that I would be interested just to throw him into the bench in deeper leagues if you have a spot. The other pair of teammates we're going to talk about is New England. We mentioned it a little bit with Drake Maye, but we're going to talk about Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk. So Demario Douglas didn't play a ton of snaps last week, but he did get the majority of the passing game work, right? I mean, he was 9 targets, 6 for 60. And so I think maybe that's going to translate into more playing time here now. I'm not sure exactly what's been going on with his playing time. It's been kind of inconsistent in terms, because he does have a game up at 83 and games below 60. So I don't know. I think maybe he's just playing as a slot receiver and not getting a ton of snaps, but they are kind of looking to him as their number one. 2 of his last 3 games, he's had 9 targets. So this is somebody that I think I'm very interested in adding him to the end of my bench, because if Maye looks better than we thought, and he's got any sort of connection with Douglas as the number 1 option in the passing game, that could turn into something that you might be able to start rest of season. So this is somebody that I really think is worth taking a shot on if you have an open roster spot.
Yeah, for Douglas specifically, like if you're in a PPR, like a full PPR league, he can be kind of one of those, cheat code type guys, kind of like a diet version of Wan'Dale Robinson, if you will. But I think, with him kind of running those short and intermediate routes over the middle, I think that'll be helpful for Drake Maye. Now with Jalen Polk, kind of what you mentioned with, playing time, his first 3 weeks, he wasn't seeing more than 60% of the snaps, but last week he was on the field for I think 100% of the snaps.
100%.
So I don't know if that was just like game script or if they're trusting him more or whatever that might be. I mean, he only had I think it was like 1 catch off of 7 targets, which, again, there's a quarterback change. But I think, Jalen Polk, they kind of view as a long-term piece for their future. I don't think he's ever going to be like a true number 1 receiver, but I think he can be a good number 2 or, really good number 3. But again, if Maye looks the part and he's feeding these 2 guys and you need to fill in week 7, they get the Jags, who are one of the worst defenses against the pass.
Yeah, and I think Polk, like you mentioned with the playing time, right? If that's what you chase, which is something I kind of do. He's got 7 and 6 targets the last 2 weeks. I know, like, right, we're looking for a role here, right? We're not necessarily looking for the production. He's a young rookie, still figuring it out. He's talented. So like the production so far, not something we're overly concerned with when we're throwing a dart at somebody deep. And I do think with the ascending playing time that this, and also both Maye and him being rookies, maybe they had rookie mini camp where they were throwing together, right? And they have some sort of connection that maybe isn't talked about a ton in the media. That this could be the guy that ends up ascending above Pop Douglas on the depth chart here. So overall, love Jalen Polk. His numbers would have looked so much better if he would have kept his feet in on that touchdown, right? I mean, I think it was over. Yeah. I think it was marked incomplete because he stepped on the line. But or there was a penalty or something happened. He had an almost touchdown.
It was. I think they called it on the field as a touchdown, then they overturned it. Oh, because then like the video replay assist, or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. He was going back and he went toe heel and it barely clipped the line. Yeah. That's what happened. So his numbers would look a lot better if he would have caught that pass. And it wouldn't have even increased his targets or anything. It would have just been another 15-yard touchdown or something like that. So 2 for 30 and a touchdown with 100% snap share with a quarterback improvement likely, right? We would have been talking about this a little bit differently had he stayed in there. So Polk, and again, if you want more upside, and like you said, the PPR safer play is probably Demario Douglas. If you want the higher upside, the guy that might ascend into the number one, that might ascend into kind of the alpha on this team in particular, regardless of what his future outlook maybe looks like if they bring in a better number one, right? And ends up being number two. I think this year he could kind of ascend into that role. So talking about the defenses then too, this is probably a lot of people's favorite part of the video, because I know I like to get ahead of defenses so you don't have to spend any FAAB. It's actually a pretty important part of the overall strategy of managing your FAAB. So if you have an open spot, I would definitely look for the defenses first. And the first one here is the New Orleans Saints defense. They played Denver. They've been decent. They haven't scored a ton of fantasy points, but they are 11th ranked defense, and they're only 16% owned. So they should be available in your leagues. Denver in week 7, obviously, they've looked a little bit better. They've won some games, but I wouldn't say this is a high-flying offense or anything, and I think the Saints should have a decent time holding them down.
Yeah, I think with Denver, they're always a good one to target. I mean, obviously, they put up some points against the Raiders, but the Raiders were just completely deflated in that game. And even when you watch Bo Nix throw the ball and kind of pepper Cortland Sutton, it just doesn't really look all that inspiring. Like, you never think that they're just going to break off a big one. So I think New Orleans also too is kind of one of those teams like plays with a lot of like momentum. And we've seen in the past when they get some defensive momentum, they can make some turnovers, score, things like that. So I think that's a good call.
Yeah. And then the second team we're going to talk about here, there are a lot of good matchups from very bad defenses. Okay. So like Jacksonville gets New England, but like Jacksonville's a bad defense. I'm not interested, right? Like the Bengals get Cleveland. It's like, no, they're a bad defense. Let's not deal with that, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to rely on that, right? Indianapolis gets Miami. It's like, oh my God, Indy's a bad defense. Maybe that's finally the week Huntley puts it together, right? Like, so I understand that those guys are those defenses are probably going to be highly ranked in your projections just because of the defense or because of the teams they're playing against. But I would leave those guys alone. The team I'm looking for, which is a little bit further down, is the Washington Commanders. So they're currently 23rd amongst defenses, but they've played better against Arizona and Cleveland last 2 weeks, double-digit fantasy points, and they get Carolina in week 7. There's the matchup. There's the defense that's ascending, the team that's ascending that you could probably take advantage of in a solid matchup against Carolina there. So ideally, they'll be able to keep the ball away from Carolina. The Commanders are very good at rushing the ball, obviously, with Jaden Daniels, and maybe Brian Robinson's a little bit healthier by then. And, Carolina will have to play some catch up, but, if they get way down and they're just in constant throwing game script, that also sets up the Commanders to possibly get a few more sacks than normal. That's kind of what happened last week against Cleveland. They had 7 sacks on Deshaun Watson, even though Deshaun Watson is just a magnet for sacks. He's just terrible. But they did get Kyler Murray 4 times as well. So against Carolina, Andy Dalton, if they get into a positive game script, they can kind of just pin their ears back and go. So I would be looking for the Commanders over any of those other teams I mentioned.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is the defense that I would prioritize. I think you hit the nail on the head with Arizona kind of holding them down. I think to start the year, we were like, oh, just target Washington, just target Washington. They don't have the pieces on defense. But I think what we're seeing with them is like obviously a defensive minded head coach where he's improving their defense. Like, I don't know, sometimes it's just that simple, and they play keep away so well with how effectively they run the ball that, we can get into a negative game script. And obviously Andy Dalton's been better than Bryce Young, but if you're down 2 scores and you're throwing every time, like there's probably going to be a pick mixed in there too.
All right. And with that, thank you guys for watching. That is our week 6 Beat the Waiver Wire for players we're looking at week 7. If you want the rankings for this weekend, comment down below rankings. If you have any other players that you're looking at to try and beat the waiver on, comment them down below. And we look forward to talking to you guys in the next one. Thank you so much.